You've probably heard people argue about generations, who ruined the economy, who's too soft, who's addicted to their phones. But there's one generation that almost nobody talks about. And the strange part? They might understand reality better than all the others. They don't complain, they don't show off, they don't ask for attention. They just quietly see things before they happen. And once you understand how their minds were shaped, you'll never look at people the same way again. Think about that one person in your life, the one who rarely talks about themselves, the one who doesn't panic when things go wrong, the one who somehow already has a backup plan before anyone else even realizes there's a problem. They're not loud, they're not dramatic, but when everything starts falling apart, they're the calmest person in the room. Now here's the question. Why? Why do some people naturally think ahead, stay guarded, and handle chaos better than others? It's not luck. It's not personality, it's conditioning. There was a generation that grew up in a completely different world. A world with less safety, less guidance, and almost no emotional cushioning. And that environment didn't just change their habits, it rewired how they think, trust, and survive. In this video, you'll understand the hidden psychology behind them and why it quietly shapes how they move through life today. Point 1. Independence was not a choice. It was survival. They didn't learn independence as a skill. They absorbed it as a necessity. Growing up, they were often alone. No constant supervision, no instant help, no quick answers. If something went wrong, there was no one to immediately fix it. That kind of environment creates something powerful in the brain, self-reliance under pressure. Psychologically, when a child repeatedly faces situations without external support, the brain adapts by strengthening problem-solving pathways. Instead of seeking help, it learns to act first and deal with consequences later. Over time, this becomes automatic. Imagine a child coming home to an empty house. They have to manage time, hunger, boredom, even small fears, all by themselves. No instructions, no reassurance, just silence. That silence teaches something most people never learn early enough. No one is coming. Figure it out. And once that belief is installed, it never fully goes away. That's why, even as adults, they don't wait. They don't hesitate. They don't depend. They move. Because deep down, they learned one truth very early. If you don't handle your life, no one else will. Here is something most people don't realize. Point 2. They don't trust easily because they saw too much. Trust for them is not natural, it's calculated. They grew up watching contradictions. People said one thing and did another. Promises were made and then broken. Stability looked real until it suddenly disappeared. Psychologically, this creates something called protective skepticism. The brain stops accepting things at face value and starts analyzing patterns instead. It doesn't mean they expect the worst, it means they prepare for it. Think about someone who watched authority figures fail, systems collapse, or stability vanish without warning. That experience teaches a quiet but powerful lesson. Just because something looks secure doesn't mean it is. In real life, this shows up in subtle ways. They double-check decisions. They read between the lines. They don't fully relax just because things seem okay. To others, it might look like negativity, but it's not negativity. It's memory. They've seen how quickly things can change, and because of that, they don't blindly believe. They observe first. Because once you've been disappointed enough times, you stop trusting words and start trusting patterns. But the truth is even deeper. Point 3. They think ahead because they had to. Most people react to problems. They anticipate them. This difference comes from what psychologists call high-consequence learning environments. When your actions have immediate and real consequences, your brain starts predicting outcomes before acting. They grew up in exactly that kind of environment. No safety net, no buffer, no second chances every time. If they made a mistake, they faced it. And that kind of feedback loop trains the brain to simulate the future constantly. Imagine touching something hot once. You learn. But imagine living in a system where mistakes happen often and consequences are unavoidable. Your brain starts running scenarios automatically. What happens if I do this? What could go wrong? What's the backup plan? In real life, this is why they seem calm during chaos. They've already mentally visited that situation before it happened. They're not lucky, they're prepared, because their mind is always a few steps ahead. And when you've already seen the storm in your head, you don't panic when it arrives in real life. This is where things get interesting. Point 4. They value privacy more than attention. To them, being visible doesn't feel powerful. It feels risky. They grew up in a time where mistakes disappeared, embarrassing moments faded, personal life stayed personal. There was no permanent record of everything. Psychologically, this created a strong boundary between self and public. But today's world is the opposite. Everything is shared, everything is visible, everything is stored. And for someone wired to value privacy, this feels uncomfortable, even unsafe. Think about it. If you believe that information about you can be used, judged, or misunderstood, why would you willingly expose everything? That's why they don't rush to share. They don't overshare emotions. They don't broadcast every moment. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand something most people forget. The more people know about you, the less control you have over your own story. So they stay quiet, they observe, they participate selectively, because in their world, silence isn't weakness, it's protection. Point 5. They don't seek validation, they seek competence. They don't need applause, they need results. Growing up, praise wasn't always constant. Recognition wasn't guaranteed. What mattered more was whether something worked or didn't. This shifts the brain from external validation to internal standards. Psychologically, this builds what's called intrinsic motivation. Instead of asking, "Will people like this?" the mind asks, "Does this actually work?" In real life, this shows up as quiet competence. They don't announce their efforts. They don't market themselves constantly. They just improve. Think about someone who fixes problems without talking about it. Someone who doesn't post achievements but consistently delivers results. That's not accidental. That's conditioning. They learned early that attention doesn't guarantee success, but skill does. And because of that, they invest in becoming valuable, not visible. Because at the end of the day, attention fades, but competence stays. Here is something even more powerful. Point 6. They struggle with vulnerability. Even when they need help, strength has a hidden cost. And for them, it's emotional distance. When you grow up handling everything alone, asking for help doesn't feel natural. It feels uncomfortable, even wrong. Psychologically, this creates a pattern where the brain associates vulnerability with weakness or risk. Instead of opening up, it suppresses. Imagine dealing with stress, fear, or confusion, but never expressing it because you're used to solving things internally. Over time, this becomes identity. I'll handle it. I don't need help. I'll figure it out. In real life, this makes them incredibly strong during crises, but it also creates isolation. Because strength without expression becomes silence, and silence slowly builds distance. They may have people around them, they may even care deeply, but letting someone truly see their struggles, that's harder. Because when you've survived by relying on yourself, trusting someone else with your vulnerability feels like giving up control. Here's the deeper truth. Human behavior is not random. It is shaped by environment, repetition, and emotional experience. This generation didn't become this way by choice. They were shaped by a world that demanded independence, exposed inconsistency, and rewarded resilience. And when the brain adapts to survive, those adaptations don't disappear. They become personality, they become habits, they become identity. That's why they think differently. That's why they act differently. That's why they see things others miss. Because their mind was trained in a reality where nothing was guaranteed. Now pause for a moment. Think about your own life, the way you handle problems, the way you trust people, the way you react to uncertainty. None of it is random. It all comes from somewhere. Maybe you learned to depend on others. Maybe you learned to protect yourself. Maybe you learned to hide or to prove. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The way you were shaped is quietly controlling how you live today. And most people never question it. They just repeat it over and over again. This generation isn't louder. They aren't more visible. They don't demand recognition, but they carry something rare. Clarity. They understand that life is unpredictable, that people are imperfect, that stability is temporary. And instead of resisting that truth, they adapted to it. That's their real strength, not independence, not toughness, awareness. And maybe the lesson isn't to become like them, but to understand what shaped them. Because once you understand that, you start seeing people differently. You start understanding behavior differently. And most importantly, you start understanding yourself. And that changes everything.